Te hewa mauri ora ki te whaiau, ki te taiau, ki te ao marama ki au we te hewa mauri ora. Ko Māpuna tēnei e mihi atu nei. This is Māpuna, the podcast. And well, we've got a very special privilege for Māpuna for this week. We are in Blenheim at the home of Professor Atholl Anderson. He is, well, you've probably heard his name before. If you haven't, you've probably read many of his books. He has written some of our mightiest tomes in terms of New Zealand and Māori history, and has also been involved with research for his own iwi of Ngai Tahu, a companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit in 2016, and also a recipient of the Prime Minister's Award for Literary Achievement. He has written the award-winning book Tangata Whenua, co-authored with the late Dame Judith Binney and Professor Aroha Harrison, Ngai Tahu, A Migration History, and more recently, the revised edition of his 1998 book, The Welcome of Strangers, A History of Southern Māori. We will talk about all of that, but also about his own entree into academic research and his upbringing in Hāwera, a descendant of Ngai Tahu from his tupuna wahine whare tūtū, and his time overseas as well. We also posed the question to him, are there any questions that still need answers, and what he will be doing in the future as well. I hope you enjoy this. It is a privilege to be a part of this interview with Professor Atholl Anderson that we've been looking forward to holding and hosting for a number of years, actually since the podcast started with Tama Muru and I will disclose that we were able to secure and procure this interview because our producer Tama is his nephew. But beyond that, I'm sure the sterling reputation of the show has reached his ears. Nō reira te wi whakarongo mai, it is Māpuna, with our very special guest, Professor Atholl Anderson e te wi whakarongo mai. E te matua tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Morena.
Thank you very much for having us here, for welcoming us.
Pleasure.
And for sharing your time with us. Sorry for the lengthy introduction.
No.
But when one gets the opportunity, and your nephew and I, and for the benefit of the audience, Atholl's nephew Tama is our producer for Māpuna. We have been talking about this for a couple of years, actually ever since we started the show, about hopefully getting the opportunity to sit and talk with you. So thank you for having us. It's a privilege to be here with you.
Well, I hope it's worth it.
It will be. Can I start by asking, why did you choose history and archaeology as a career?
I think they chose me, really. I didn't... what you do in your life, I think, is determined by factors that are really beyond your control. They have to do with your circumstances of upbringing, your personality, and probably things that you see and do very early on in your life. And I think that was the case for me. I do remember quite vividly my grandmother's house in Hāwera. Of course, I was born there in 1943, but we used to go back from Dunedin from time to time in the holidays when we were in primary school, and Grandma was I don't know quite how to describe her. She was a rather strict and very Māori woman, and she wasn't keen on the modern day. I remember when Dad bought her a radio. She didn't have a radio in her house, and she was outraged. She refused to have this thing in her house, and she still chopped her wood by hand for the stove.
Wow.
She had a cow which she milked every day.
Wow.
And she did that right up until almost to her, it was certainly into her 80s, almost to her death at the age of 88. My mother said that she used to go down to Kaupokonu where the local Māori fishing boats would be out, and she would buy fish from them, and she would bring them home and put them on the fence to dry, which wasn't highly popular, I think, in the neighbourhood. But she had quite a big property. It was several acres, I think, in her house in the middle with an orchard, and it's now under one of the big supermarkets in Hauora.
Wow, wow.
Yeah, but to get back to the point, she also had various bits and pieces of Māori artefacts, which she kept in the what do you call it? Not the living room. You know how in the old days people used to have one room which was for visitors.
Yeah.
In that room,
Wow.
in her house, and so I remember there being some pounamu pieces. There was something. It was either a taiaha or some other weapon there, and things like that. And as I say, I remember those from very early age. So when I say I didn't really pick this, I think it chose me. I think it's that kind of experience from very early on that predisposed me towards an interest in these things.
When did you, because those are quite significant things to have. Not everyone used to have things like taiaha, unless they were handed down, generation through generation, direct connection to a tupuna who possessed that taonga. When did you become aware of the fact that those were quite significant pieces of, well, not just iwi history, but Māori history that was a part of your upbringing?
I never really did, because after we shifted to Nelson, when I was 14, I think, Grandma came to live with us. She was in her last years.
Yeah.
So we never went back. So it never occurred to me then that they were of any particular value.
But certainly piqued interest, though, eh?
It certainly piqued my interest, yes, certainly.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was, quite close to us was that power site.
And how about Tungutu o Te Manu, Von Temsky?
No, it's the place where, I wish I could remember the name of it. It's the place where there was a British Army redoubt.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yep, I'm sure. Yep,
something Mokai.
Yeah. Mokai. Yes. Turuturu Mokai.
Turuturu Mokai.
Yeah.
So that was one of the places we used to go when we were living with Grandma. As kids, we would go and walk around there and climb up in and out of the defensive ditches and so on. So I guess that was another stimulus too.
You said she was very Māori. I suspect that's not just because of the way she lived, and also, as I say, those kind of significant heirlooms and taonga that you had in the house. But it also, and correct me if I'm wrong, was she someone that people would seek out, or someone that certainly held a lot of knowledge about history and things like that, and whakapapa?
I'm not sure about whakapapa, but she certainly held a lot of knowledge about the family history of both the Borri side of the family, which is the line that comes through from Wharetutu, and also the Henson side, the Hensons being early settlers in Whanganui. They had the brickworks here, so they manufactured most of the bricks that were used in the early building of Whanganui, and they also built the first steamer on the river, the Pioneer, and then they became farmers.
Wow.
Family sort of spread out in Manawatu and Taranaki.
Was there an expectation that you would follow in that kind of tradition of keeping knowledge or help teach or learn in some way, shape or form?
There was certainly an expectation that we'd take education very seriously. Yes, that was in the family. I think on both sides, and Dad's side and Mum's side.
Yeah. When did that start to take effect in terms of forming a career?
Well, to go back to the Go-By Desert, which is quite a good place to start, when there was at Pine Hill School, which I went to, the annual fairs they have to raise money. They always had a book fair there, and I bought a book by a very well-known paleontologist called Roy Chapman Andrews, an American, who wrote books about searching for dinosaurs in the Go-By Desert. And they were wonderful stories. I mean, I was very attracted to to the dinosaurs and the dinosaur eggs and all of the other things that he found, but also to the fact that you charged around in these open-topped cars, being chased by Mongolian soldiers, and it just seemed a wonderful career. So that sort of thing, the adventure of it, I think, and there's one thing about archaeology, it is quite adventurous, particularly if you do a lot of field work, as I've done.
Yeah. And hence the interest in the book, The Business of Exploring, I believe.
That's right, This Business of Exploring.
Tell me the story.
Yeah, that was the name of it, of the book, and that was the story of his adventures in the Gobi Desert. You'd get up out of your tent in the morning, and there'd be scorpions in your boots, which you had to shake out before you put the boots on. I like all that. I think we've got off the point, but
no. But because of that interest, though, what was there a determination pretty early on that you were going to follow in the footsteps of that kind of field of endeavour and end up at university studying archaeology? Was that always the primary plan for you?
I don't think it went that far, but it certainly, at the time when I was in Standard 5, my mother took me out of primary, Pine Hill Primary School, and I was sent to Dunedin North Intermediate, which is one of the very first intermediates that began, because I think she thought that I needed more of a challenge than I was getting at primary school. I was always a great reader, and from very early age, preschool, I was reading very well preschool. So I think she saw some potential there for some sort of scholarly pursuit, whether it was teaching or whatever it might have been.
When did you know you had a bit of a penchant for that kind of thing?
Probably by the time I got to Nelson College. We shifted to Nelson when I was in the fourth form, 1958, and and then I did quite well in school cert, and that's when I really became interested in historical things, because I had a wonderful history teacher. He was called Jerp because his surname was Patterson, but his initials were J.E.R. So, and many people who went to Nelson College will remember Jerp Patterson. He was famous for his ability to teach history. He made it just so interesting and alive.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what that's like myself. We had a guy called Fred Jackson, who's a brother of Moana Jackson. Very good history teacher. Hardest marker, even harder than half the markers I had at university. But, there's that thing of, but for the influence of really significant people in one's life.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
that's so true.
Why the turn towards the history of Aotearoa? I get archaeology and it's exciting. But, Aotearoa, I guess, can be as exciting in terms of a field of study. But what made you want to focus on Aotearoa and the Pacific in particular?
I suppose partly because that's where I'm from, and the place that you grow up in and the place that you have ancestry in is sort of intrinsically interesting. I did work overseas. I loved it in Scandinavia, particularly doing the field work up in the north of Scandinavia, learning enough Swedish to be able to read the historical and archaeological literature, but not the newspapers. It's quite interesting how when you travel around doing things, that's what you do. You learn enough for what you want. But but I wanted to come back. I have family back here, friends back here. So coming back, it was a natural thing to work in this area. Also, there's always been exciting things about the Pacific, about when people managed to get from, across these huge distances of ocean and get from place to place. Yeah. How they did it and how they made a living when they got to where they were, and all kinds of issues about population growth. How rapidly would populations grow? How would they how would social circumstances adapt to rising population growth in terms of things like splitting off into clan and tribal territories, and then relations between them, trading relations and social relations between them. It's like looking at a new world, and indeed in a way it is a new world, where you start with nothing, in other words no people, and then you introduce people to it, and then almost like an experiment you watch to see what they do in this new world.
Was the when part of when Aotearoa was quote unquote founded, was that as important now? It seems to me it's still a hotly debated, hotly contested, hotly considered issue even now. People still talk about 1300 AD. Some say if you look at the oral tradition, 600 AD. It seems to be something that even Diefenbach was talking about in 1826, or George Gray in 1854 in Ngamahianga Tupuna, even going down to S. Percy Smith in 1912, and trying to find a definitive time. Was that still very much the case when you came back to Aotearoa and looked?
Yes, it was. Because elsewhere in East Polynesia, in Tahiti, Marquesas, Hawaii, to some extent the Cook Islands, archaeology there, as here, was still a relatively new discipline. Radiocarbon dating was still relatively new. It had only come here in 1950. In fact, it had only been invented about 1947. So everything was very new about it, and we didn't know about the foibles that are involved in it in terms of what you date and the various kinds of inbuilt age that might be in the materials that you date, which therefore you get a wrong age for them and so on. All of that kind of thing was still not very well known. And some of the early radiocarbon dates certainly suggested that there were people in the other islands of East Polynesia as early as possibly 2,000 years ago. So the issue of when New Zealand was settled was very much a live one. But I must say that when you look back at it, probably the best guides are the very early recorders of Māori tradition, because they got unencumbered accounts of whakapapa, which put them right on the money of what we think is the date now.
Who are the likes of the people that we're talking about here?
Edward Shortland, for example. Yeah. Shortland, of course, went down to Otago 1843 as protector of Aborigines, which was a bit of a odd term in our times, but that's what he was supposed to do. But of course his job really was to interpret so that the New Zealand government could find out who owned the land, and therefore who they could buy it from. So Shortland talked to Hawaii and to Te Mōrehu, of course, two of our great authorities. And from each of them he got the same story, which was that the first people came to the land, I think he said 19 generations ago. And he said, being a medical doctor, the length of a generation is 30 years. Many people think it's a lot smaller, a lot shorter. Actually, overall average, it's 30 years. So he, Shortland, in 1844, multiplied the generations by the number of years and got the age of 1300 AD.
Yep.
And we've been arguing about that ever since, but we're right back at 1300 AD, more or less, right now.
Yeah. You also had, I've heard stories of Hiruspiti and his travails throughout the South, but as you said, first-hand accounts, and trying as much as possible to not be encumbered by interpretation or things like just to record. Amazing.
Oh,
people.
Incredible man. Particularly when you think, he was a man with very little money, and so he biked everywhere. Bike and train was his mode of getting around. So he'd get the train, say, to Oamaru, from Dunedin to Oamaru, and then he'd get on his bike and bike to Temuka or wherever he needed to go. Actually, he lived in Temuka for a while, but he did that going south too. He would get the train to Invercargill, then he'd bike out to, say, Aparima or whatever on this, one of those old bikes with no gears, and interview somebody and then bike back again, catch a train back to Dunedin. Amazing, just so dedicated. And as you say, dedicated particularly to to giving the records or to recording the records exactly as they were given to him, without attempting to interpret them while they were, in their initial form.
Yeah.
So we in the south we're extremely lucky for the amount of historical material that we have gathered by him and others that were Chapman and others that were recording at the same time.
You talked earlier about some of the foibles in the early carbon dating process. I remember a story about Yoshi Snoto and that find that he did at I think Mopiti, 1960 I think it was, and went on to obviously be at the Bishop Museum. I think the original finding that he had there for carbon dating was that they'd found some bones plus some taonga, I think, from the South Island, which he carbon dated to 800 AD, and then he corrected them and said that he thinks they came much later, around 1200 AD. But it's those kinds of people that, through their work, have helped lots of people in Aotearoa start to consider more and think more about not only when we came, but how we came. And the who part is as well.
Yes.
When you hear things like that, what do you think of when people look at the study of and work of Yoshi Snoto and others and potentially get a different interpretation out of what those original findings might have been?
Well, Yoshi, of course, was one of those people who was there right at the beginning. The very first radiocarbon dating of Pacific material, I think, took place in Hawaii. Excuse me, with Emery and Shinoto. And I think they got dates of around about 2,000 years ago for those very first samples. So for a long time, people were rather disposed towards the idea that the initial human settlement of East Polynesia was sometime early in the first millennium AD. So there were dates of, as you said before, dates of 300, 600 and so on AD, then the Marquesas and elsewhere. It took a long time for people to realise that if you just pick a piece of charcoal up, for example, and you don't know where it came from in a tree, which you usually don't, of course, it could be from the heart of a very old tree. And the tree might have been 1,000 years old at the time when it died. Of course, what the radiocarbon process is doing is counting the age at death of the specimen. So it already had 1,000 years of age when it died. So it's giving you an age which is much older than it ought to be.
Did you see your work in those years as helping to try and correct the record, or simply just to record?
Well, I don't really distinguish between those. Yes, recording is the important thing, but attempting to test, I would say, we're testing the evidence of our predecessors, and we're testing the evidence of our own earlier work to see whether it still holds up.
Why was that so important for you?
I think because it's not worth doing what you do unless you do it as well as you can and as accurately as you can. I think that's what sort of inherent in scholarship.
You have said, I want to get the quote right, you like the quote, margins of cultural history. Looking at your whakapapa, you could argue that your life was on the margins.
Yes, absolutely. I like margins, and I like them in a scholarly sense, because margins are where things are tested. You find out what's important, what works and what doesn't on the margins of things. So, for example, I've been working on Enderby Island in the Auckland Islands.
Wow.
On a few occasions, and I did a small excavation there. You find out what survives of the integrity of Māori culture on those very marginal areas. What could they do and what couldn't they do? How long could they hold on there? And it turns out not very long, actually. Because they were right on the sort of climatic margins. Of course, they're far, far away from any possibility of agriculture. They have no large trees, so if your only lifeline back to your native community is through the canoe, and if your canoe is lost or broken, what are you going to do? How are you going to get another canoe to get back? So they had rata trees, but rata down there grows in this very sort of tangled way. It's a very tough wood to work with, extremely so. So you would only be able to chop out relatively small lengths of it and build some sort of vessel. So, they were really living on the edge.
What particularly draws you to margins? You say you like the margins.
That's the reason I like it, because it tells you, it tests, whatever it is that makes you what you are, whether it's your social circumstances, whether it's your technological circumstances, whether it's your ability to create a viable economic system. All of those things I think are important.
When you think about it, you think about places like Rapa Nui.
Yeah.
How were people able to survive in such an isolated place for such a long time?
Yeah.
Right up into the point of the introduction of new culture and things like that. But it is fascinating, eh?
It is very interesting, and Rapa Nui is a very good case exactly of that sort of thing, that the forest went and didn't go entirely. There were still some trees, particularly in the craters of the island, but it very nearly was gone. And one of the interesting things, of course, of Rapa Nui and in New Zealand is the length of the duration of the habitation there is so relatively short compared to so many other places in the rest of the world, that you're left to wonder what would have happened if they had still been there isolated for another 1,000 years. And one can only conjecture about what would happen. I don't know, but it would have been very difficult.
I'm sure you've been asked this before, and I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Where is Hawaii? I can see the look on your face now. Or does it matter?
It matters in an archaeological sense. Hawaii is a very subtle term, isn't it?
Yep.
It has so many meanings. You're born in the Hawaii of the soul. Hawaii is a spiritual and a mythical dimension. It's a direction. The interesting thing is that the Māori always pointed to the northeast. They knew where they came from, that was Hawaii was there. it only matters, of course, in archaeology as a means of locating or confirming where we think people came from. And we still don't know enough to say. It's clearly somewhere in central East Polynesia, and it may be from a number of places. It may be that at the time of the migrations to New Zealand, which, while they weren't a great fleet, nonetheless, it does seem very likely that there were multiple passages, multiple canoes coming at roughly the same time, certainly within, say, one person's lifetime. The word might have got around in, Rarotonga and Tahiti and down in the Australs that there was said to be, land for the taking. So it's possible that Hawaii was the whole of that area.
And the only reason why I said doesn't matter is because of this new generation of language-speaking, culturally proud, and possibly knowledgeable young Māori who are really interested in that kind of thing. Maybe the idea is that because there's so much interest, to go out and explore and find answers for themselves in their own time and follow in your footsteps. The notion of having a quote-unquote homeland or Hawaii, the idea of going out and exploring, maybe that's the whole thing. People talk about the voyages of, Whenuahou, Matawhāuru and Kupe and all that kind of thing, really is a process of transmission of knowledge.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it would be fascinating to find the precise areas, precise islands where people came from.
Would you like to venture a guess for us? An educated guess, I might add.
I would say Rarotonga is the most likely place for most of the people to have come here. Sadly, we don't have material from New Zealand that got back there, and I think the reason for that is that there wasn't return voyaging. Once people got here, possibly for multiple reasons, they didn't go back. We could come back to that matter, but the point I'm trying to make is that while a few things from Central East Polynesia got to New Zealand, for example, that turret shell that had been made into a little chisel that was found at Whenuahou Bar, and it's a tropical East Polynesian shell. But very few. On the other hand, nothing got back to from New Zealand, and it'd be very surprising that nothing would. At least so far, you're always subject to the possibility that suddenly something might be found. Yeah. But when you think of the things that were in New Zealand that were so valued when people got here, and would have been immensely valued if they'd got back to Central East Polynesia, Pounamu, for example.
You would assume there'd be a lot more.
You would assume there'd be a lot more obsidian and or even just an adze made of Nelson Marlborough found somewhere in the Cooks. But no, there's none.
Yes, I think aside from that Yoshi's Sinoto excavation on Maupiti, there seems, aside from that, and from what I've heard of it anyway, it seems that that's pretty much about it, certainly in that part of Polynesia. Of whalebone, and supposedly Pounamu is what I've heard, but I could be no Pounamu at all.
No Pounamu, and nothing from New Zealand.
Okay.
The Maupiti adzes are the same form as the New Zealand adzes, but they're made of basalt from Central East Polynesia.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's good, because I was planning to go to Maupiti. I don't have to go there now. For the auspices of another bit of work that I'm doing, but don't worry, you've helped me there. How did we get here? There's been a reinvigoration of wakahaurua, of voyaging expeditions in New Zealand. There's one happening now, actually, Ngā Hiraka Mai Tawhiti going to Samoa. There's been this reinvigoration of double-hull canoes, and certainly the knowledge about the navigation comes from Mopiailo and his teaching of Nainoa Thompson and others, Heck Busby and those kinds of people. Is that how we got here? Is double hull canoe the way and the means with which we got to Aotearoa?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, almost certainly. It's difficult to imagine a outrigger canoe traversing the seas south of Rarotonga, for example, to New Zealand. It's very unlikely that it could have been a single hull canoe. So it's almost certainly a double hull canoe. We know that double hull canoes were used very early on. The real issues are about their sailing ability, and that's an area in which I've worked quite a lot.
What do you make of that? Because the knowledge system, as I say, was reinvigorated by the likes of Māpuna, which many say isn't a Polynesian tradition, actually, it's Melanesian. Satawal, and places like that who taught Nainoa Thompson and others. What do you make of that knowledge system, or you know, what now is considered to be very much a part of a Polynesian account and narrative of how sailing occurred?
Well, it's not one that came from Māori sources. That's the first thing to say. It's one which was effectively invented in Hawaii about 1970 by the argument that to get to and between the islands of Polynesia, the distances were so great that you needed a more capable technology than had been recorded by early Europeans in Polynesia. And the consequence of that argument was then that the Polynesian Voyaging Society decided to build Hokulea. And they did so by combining technical trays and capabilities from across much of the Pacific. And as you just pointed out, material on navigation from Satawal and Micronesia. The fixed masts with shrouds, with stays, from West Polynesia and Micronesia, and various other capabilities. And then in addition, they added in the great steering oars that come from essentially from Melanesia and Micronesia and West Polynesia, but never in East Polynesia. And so they made a vessel that effectively confirmed their assumption. It would do what they wanted it to do. But when you take the opposite view and say, well, let's look at what we know from the historical records, including the traditions, by the way, you get an entirely different picture. And the picture you get is that of what was recorded by, for example, Cook and Banks and others in the Pacific. So it's a double-hulled canoe, yes, but it has very low freeboard. The reason for that is that it's partly a paddling canoe. If you have high freeboard like on Hokulea, so you can't paddle them. Because the technology of fastening the hulls together is nowhere near as strong as modern day fastenings. You had to have the hulls close together. So all of these canoes, the hulls were about 1 metre apart or less. You had to have, or rather they used small steering paddles because they had a downwind sailing technology, so they're not ever having to hold the pressure of beating across, into the wind. So if you look at the picture that was drawn by Spurring of a Maori double canoe in 1769, you see the canoe there, and at the back you can just see two little paddles sticking out the back. Those are their steering paddles. Nothing like what Hokulea and others are doing. the sails are a matter of contention, but the evidence that I have got, certainly for the Māori, is that they used double spritsails, which are sails that have no mast, no fixed mast, but two spars sticking up. The sail is between them, and they only have running rigging, no shrouds or stays to hold them fixed. And so, therefore, they only operate off the wind, mostly downwind. Now, I've done a lot of work on this, and I've looked at all around the sort of Indo-Pacific, and you can see that this form is a very early form of sail that is found everywhere where there are Austronesians.
Okay.
So you get to Madagascar, for example, and Madagascar is a very good example of it, because we see not only the original form was there right up until the 1990s, we also see how it changed and why it changed into the form that it became later on in Polynesia. It went through exactly the same transformation. The important thing here is, though, that that transformation didn't happen in New Zealand until about 1840, so it's, 70 years after the arrival of Europeans. It happened earlier than that in the Central Pacific, but not until after the Latine sail, which is the Micronesian sail.
Right.
Not until after the Latine sail came into the Pacific. And we know that the Latine sail was invented in the Mediterranean around about 2,000 years ago. It came into the Indian Ocean around about 1,000 to 800 years ago, and it got into the Pacific. We don't know exactly when, except that it was still coming into the Pacific at the time when Europeans arrived, because it changed the sail form in Western Polynesia. So as we know, between the records of the 17th century and the 18th century, that the sail form changed there, and it changed as a result of the arrival of the Latine.
Right.
Okay. So the upshot of that is that all of this is happening later than the time of East Polynesian expansion. Therefore, the East Polynesian expansion must have happened with these earlier forms of sail. That's the basic argument.
And so when Cook meets with Tupaia, and Tupaia comes to Aotearoa, that 1770s illustration that you mentioned earlier, with Tupaia there, it would seem to many observers that if there was anything different from that illustration that was occurring back in Polynesia, back in Tahiti or other places where Tupaia was from, Tupaia would have said that, right? If there was anything different from what was being illustrated, Tupaia would have you would have had a different design, essentially, or a different illustration, because of Tupaia's knowledge and understanding and history as well.
Yes, yes, except that the Latine sail had got into that part of East Polynesia. So. Oh,
okay.
So
in 1760.
Yes, it was there by then, and possibly somewhat earlier, because it spread through the very central part of Polynesia, through the Society Islands, the Marquesas, and down into the Tuamotus, particularly in the Tuamotus, which had a rather pure form of the Latine sail.
Okay.
But it didn't get to other places.
Okay.
Well, it's
we're getting a free lecture here. No. Well, no, I understand, but the reason why this fascinates me is because, from being from the north, we have this massive kupe tradition. And when you see the likes of the sailing voyages that we see now, you start to think, oh, this is an exact replication of the way in which our ancestors came here. And so when you start talking about not just sail design, but also knowledge systems and things like that, it's important to keep that perspective in mind. Otherwise, the modern becomes the historical, and that's the danger we have.
That's I couldn't agree more. That's a very real danger, is that we perceive these experimental canoes, and they've long gone past experimental, they're now a cultural tray, aren't they? And we perceive those as being replications of the way in which our ancestors were travelling in the 14th century.
And but part of me also loves it because we have this reinforcement of Māori culture and identity.
And that, of course, was the purpose of it. That's what Ben Finney made explicit. That he wanted not just to recreate the voyages, but also to build the confidence in their ancestral abilities and their heritage amongst Hawaiian people. And that was a very admirable idea.
And the other effect of that also is the re-establishing of connections between Māori and other islands and other cultures and other peoples, indigenous peoples of the Pacific.
Yes, and to see it done by canoe rather than by aeroplane.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. I hope you don't mind, but I do want to focus a bit more on you and in particular your whānau. And in particular your Ngai Tahu whakapapa. You mentioned you were brought up in a hāwera, and you mentioned your grandmother, and we mentioned earlier wharetutu, your tupuna. When did you feel the sense of, or was there a sense of responsibility to start working and researching on your own people, the people of your tupuna wharetutu, the people of Ngai Tahu? When did that become something of importance, or did it just happen? Was it organic?
Really not until I got back to Otago in 1978. So it was only after growing up in New Zealand, doing other degrees, school teaching, going back to Otago University, doing degrees in archaeology, and then to Cambridge. And then I came back, as I said, I had one year in Auckland, which was very interesting, and I did some work in just can't think of the name, but the southernmost island of Tonga. It's a deserted island. That name will come to me. And I was thinking then of a career in the Pacific, working in Pacific archaeology. The next year after that, we went to the Kermadec and worked on. Found the early Polynesian site there in the Kermadec.
Yes.
But then when I went to Otago, gradually I became involved with Ngai Tahu because, all around me. and trying to do work in that area, of course, I had to be. So it didn't take long before that desire to make a career there took hold.
It was a desire, it wasn't something forced upon you by the community itself.
No, in a way quite the reverse, because in those days, and still to a large extent I think in Māoridom, there's not exactly suspicion, but there are concerns about archaeology. And, people don't want the sites of their ancestors dug up, and they fear what might be found. And so you have to approach this very carefully and discuss it in detail as to what the benefits are and to whom they accrue if it is done.
You've got to get on side with old people.
You absolutely do.
When I first came to Ngai Tahu, the best bit of advice I ever got was from Tāmāk, actually, was remember the aunties rule. Who were those people in that time, 1978, 1979, that you became particularly to rely on and work with, who are really important in that phase of your working life?
I'll tell you a little story. Nina Russell. Do you recall Nina Russell?
I heard the name. Yeah.
She was only a descendant of the only line from Te Hawaiki.
Wow.
And she knew let me get this right. Her mother knew my great-grandmother, or her grandmother knew my great-grandmother. There was a generation between them. But they went to school together on Ruapuki Island. So Naina, knew the family, and in fact there are some cross connections there in Murihiku. So this situation arose when boaties on Lake Tiano were turning up in pubs in Invercargill and elsewhere, carrying these wonderful Māori artefacts that they had found in a cave in Tiano.
On Ruapuki, yes. Yep.
In Tiano. And there was a beautiful folded tōtara bark basket, big basket, beautifully folded, and the way they made them, real work of art. There was a fantastic ads, perfect ads, very big ads of a characteristic Southland form, and other things. And anyway, Doc, I think, got onto it and found that they'd been raiding a cave on a little island called Lee Island in Lake Tiana, because if you're going up the lake to the very north end, if you were going on the Milford track, you have to go past it. And you can see that there's shelters in there, but it's hard to land on them. However, if you know they're there, you can find a way of doing that. Yes, and so they'd been taking these things and bringing them back. So I got in touch with Waihopai, and I said, we really need to do something about this, and they were very resistant. Anyway, ultimately they sent me a letter, as we did in those days, there was no email. They sent me a letter saying, would I come to a meeting at George Tao's place in...
Oh, George Tao.
Yeah. In Invercargill.
Yeah. And
I got down there and I walked in, and the place was wall to wall with Waihopai Māori. And I wondered what was up here. And the first thing that George said to me was, we believe you are related to us. So I sort of stumbled through what I knew of, the relationship with the people in the south. And after that, then we had a wonderful meal of roasted mutton birds, stuffed mutton birds, just absolutely fabulous. And so Naina was there, and we had the meeting after we'd done the, all the sort of social thing and the kai. We had the meeting about Lee Island. And the others were persuaded that, look, somebody had to, if do nothing else, to recover what was left there, otherwise it was just going to all go. But Naina, who was very influential, just couldn't do it. And she said to me, I can see, the argument you're making, and I can see, that it would be worthwhile, to recover these things. But I can't go to my ancestors and say that I gave you permission. So eventually she just stepped out of the picture, and in other words, she just didn't, as it were, vote. And
but let the meeting make the decision.
The meeting made the decision. Yeah.
Wow. You see the power of that old
yes.
We call it old school thinking, but there's a better way of putting it.
Yes.
To Atholl. You know what I mean?
I do.
But what a beautiful way of doing it.
Yeah.
What's it like having that level of responsibility to do that, mate, though?
Well, it's huge. I mean, if you get it wrong.
How do you do it when you know that there's that? Wow, because what she said blows me away.
Yeah. You just have to. You take a kind of a calculated risk, I suppose. We went there. There were actually 3 rock shelters with material in them. One main rock shelter, which was clearly the area where they had mainly been living. Radiocarbon dates suggest about 17th century. It was full of kakapo, bundles of kakapo feathers, parrot feathers, There was the burnt neck area of a feathered cloak with the dog skin collar and everything. Absolutely extraordinary stuff. There's just a scatter of beautiful Pounamu adzes. There were poles leaning against the wall, which clearly had been used as something like a drying rack, and we found bones of eel and so on in the midden. The midden had kakapo and kaka and all kinds of other things in it. It was an amazing sight. So we excavated some of it, but other than that, we just recovered everything that was visible, and it's went back to the Southern Museum.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's there now or whether Waihopai have themselves got the material, but at least it's there, and at least people can go and see and handle some of the things. I mean, the adzes are beautiful adzes and so on. Yeah.
Wow. Having kind of dabbled in Māori history, mainly Ngāpuhi history, really, for a long time, I struggle to understand what that must be like, protecting whakapapa in history. Protecting whakapapa in history.
Yeah.
And, the central thing about it is that whakapapa. The whakapapa bit's really important, you know.
It is.
Do you see that as being the role? The ongoing transmission of knowledge and whakapapa to future generations, the protection of our culture and identity?
Yes, certainly I do. You've written the prescription.
But it's only because one wishes to aspire to that level of understanding and knowledge. That's
absolutely, Julian. And I have to mention here that, of course, you've done a PhD on kupe, haven't you?
Yeah. Please don't examine me over the air. I feel something coming that I might not be prepared for.
No, but you've been doing it in your way too, and there are different approaches. Archaeology is one of them, but history and when I'm talking about history, I'm talking about textual analysis. Very fine-grained, careful, probing form of historical analysis.
The difference is, though, Mata, Atholl, sorry, Professor, sorry, I don't mind, is that archaeology is irrefutable. It is irrefutable. When you get to narrative analysis, and you can do as many literature reviews as you want and all that kind of thing, when you get to narrative analysis, there's still the element of is it plausible? Yes. Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? Don't know. Because it's so long ago. Archaeology is irrefutable. That's the difference.
It's irrefutable, but it's anonymous. That's each of our disciplines has a problem. Archaeology is anonymous. We really don't know who those people were. When we pick up, even on say a par site, say you went to Māputahi, where we know the story of the fall of Māputahi Pa. It's well known in Otago, the names of the people who attacked, who was there, the circumstances. It was taken in the middle of winter when the people put puppets on the palisades so that they could sleep, and the attacking force realised that these weren't sentries at all. They managed to break in. That story, I've heard it told, in person on the marae by Edward Allison's father. Wonderful to hear it. Okay, we know that, and we know the site. But if we go there and we found some things, let's say we found a Pounamu pendant, we wouldn't know. Was it any of those people? Was it their forefathers? Was it somebody who came after them? We would never, of course, know which individual had it. So that's the difficulty with archaeology, and this is the problem that when you try and combine archaeology and history, there's always that gap which is so hard to cross. Now, we are starting to get close to it, I might say, and this is work that's being...
You're talking about Ngai Tahu here, aren't you?
I'm talking about Māoridom in general.
Okay.
Yeah. And Zach McIver, who's now at Otago University, did a wonderful thesis and PhD at Waikato. And he and his colleagues, they're gradually refining the timing of the building of these pa down to a point where they can get it to within, say, plus or minus, say, 7 years of a palisade being put into the ground. So if we can get that sort of timing on the building of the pa, and if we can refine our whakapapa to the point where, you know, we could say it would have to be that generation that was there, we're starting to get very close to closing the gap.
Yeah.
But what they are doing is a very complex business of finding the bases of poles, palisade poles in the swamp, and knowing, because there's still bark on them, that when they date the bark, they're dating the actual age that the tree died without any inbuilt age.
Yeah.
They can get a very precise and accurate date.
Wow.
So, things change all the time. But yes, that's the difficulty with archaeology. You know the people, but you can't tell exactly where they were.
Yes. Yes, that is true. Well, there's that, and also there's the influence of fairly recent, the understanding of the scholars that the likes of Gray relied upon, Te Rangi Kaheke and Aotearoa Tonu, who we know had a bit of fun with Gray. And so therefore it's hard to, you can take some things of what the likes of Gray, and even up to Jagger and Best, there's talk of, and conversations in Tūhoe of some of the sources that Best relied upon, who we know you had a bit of fun with Best as well. There's some things that are irrefutable, there's other things that they had a bit of fun with, and therefore you start to think, okay, what's the impact of that on the rest of the knowledge that they imparted, and where did the rest of that other knowledge go, and if it went through traditional whare wānanga processes. In places where those whare wānanga don't exist, have we completely lost that knowledge, And so it feels like, to me anyway, it feels like you're always a little bit behind the eight ball when you're trying to understand and unpackage that kind of narrative history, because you feel there's so much lost knowledge.
Yes, I agree, and there's a frustration in that in history, just as there is in archaeology. You want to take that next step and make something more concrete. Yeah.
I've completely forgotten what I was just asking about, but there is another thing I did want to touch on, was you were involved in the Ngai Tahu claim,
yes,
and worked with what was his name again? Tibene O'Regan, that's right. And I think 1987 or 88. It was about
yes, 87 onwards, from 87 onwards. Yes.
What a fascinating time that must have been.
Oh, it was.
I've heard stories of Trevor House.
Oh yeah.
What did they call him? He was the bird. Oh, his name. Anyway. Trevor House and others were involved in that project. What a time!
It was a marvellous time, really, because it brought the iwi together, and I had responsibility for the po on Mahinga Kai. So I had a group. We used to meet every Wednesday on the what was the cafe area, what was then the Hocken building at University of Otago, on the 10th floor. We used to meet after work on Wednesday, and there would be people there like what I think of still of as the younger Ngai Tahu, like Edward Allison and
the younger. Well, to be fair to him, he doesn't look like he's aged since 1987. To be honest with you, Edward.
But Edward was there, and Tahu.
Oh yes.
Look, it's hard for me to think of names now, but the Russell girls, and there were lots of people involved in it, and we would meet and share information and decide on how we were going to proceed to deal with various things. And we had people who'd never been in a library before going into the Hocken Library and getting out original manuscripts and copying them out, because many of them you couldn't photocopy or anything like that. They were too fragile. So it was a terrific time, and then to be travelling around with this group of relatives
Yes.
to the various marae within the rohi, and all the contretemps of giving evidence and being cross-examined, and it was marvellous. I think back on it as one of those great experiences in my life, really.
Was Bob Faititi still alive?
Bob was alive up until at least the time he was. I think he might have died just about the time when the claim was heard in 88, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah. I think you even had was Anne Parsonson was involved?
Anne was involved. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating time. How important was that for you being involved in that process? Obviously, given your whakapapa, wharetutu and that. What an amazing thing to do, to get people with skill that have whakapapa link involved in a process like that. It talks a lot about the coordination and ability of certain people whose names I may have already mentioned, to be able to unite and bind people together for the common cause.
Yes.
What an amazing project.
Yes. Well, Tipene was a terrific leader of the whole process, and we owe a huge amount to his abilities. For me, it really sort of changed the direction of my research in a large way, because I could see doing that, how much more there was to learn through the documents than I had appreciated.
There was also some, I'm trying to find the right way of putting this. There was also some quote-unquote scholarship about Ngai Tahu history that was being written at the time, which, in the words of certain Ngai Tahu luminaries, was made up.
Yes.
And being considered as actual factual evidence, or actual factual documentation of Ngai Tahu history, when it wasn't.
It was. In fact, it was dangerous.
Dangerous,
in many ways. One of those people came to one of our meetings in the Hocken building and insisted that he knew about all the traditional fish traps on Mount Cargill and so on. 19, he said there were. He was full of information.
Does it irk you that some of that literature is still available now?
It does. It does. And, it's still being published.
It's still being published, yeah.
But we nearly got into real trouble because a lot of the evidence that was given early on in this process on Ngai Tahu fisheries was said to be traditional evidence of Ngai Tahu that had come through Waitaha about all the fisheries, and the sword fishery down off southwest cape of Fiordland, and all of these wonderful deep sea fisheries. The deep sea fisheries was what it was telling us about. And the evidence was being prepared for a Māori Land Court or the High Court, I can't remember which. And I was looking at it just a couple of days before Tipene was there to give it, and I thought, I'm sure I've read that paragraph somewhere else. And eventually, tracking through my bookshelf, I came across a book written about South Island fisheries by, I've forgotten his name now, but he was the director of that place at Portobello where they study fisheries. Yeah. He wrote a book in the 1940s and 1950s. And when I opened it and read it, damn me, this is what this guy had.
Word for word.
Word for word.
Wow.
So I had to phone up Tipene and say, you can't lodge that evidence.
Wow. Speaking of Tipene, in 1991 he delivered a lecture called Old Myths, New Politics, in which he said, quote, the mundane business of applying scholarly standards to Māori tradition and history as the only weapon we have to defend the integrity of the Māori memory. he always says we must remember to remember. What is the situation regarding that issue in Ngai Tahu like now?
It's hard to say in general, but certainly, of course, the people I usually work with are precisely of that opinion, of Tipane's opinion. So in Te Pai Korako, for example, we're all either historians or archivists or people who professionally involved in that. What it's like in, more generally, or in some areas of Ngai Tahu, I don't know.
Okay. Are you all right?
Yeah.
No. We've discussed some concerns. I was at Ngai Tahu when there were claims made about hui te rangiora.
Oh yes.
And voyages to Antarctica. I think I know your position on this, but just for the avoidance of doubt, if I say hui te rangiora in Antarctica, what's your reaction?
My reaction is that it's not a genuine tradition of Ngai Tahu. It's probably not a Māori tradition at all. It certainly was. It was recorded, of course, in Rarotonga by Percy Smith or Elson Best. Can't remember exactly.
I think it was Percy Smith.
Percy Smith. In 1894. It's the key phrase in it is whitecaps. What do you call it? There's a Tai.
Yes.
You know what I'm referring to.
Yes. As far as the land turns white, or something like that.
Yes. The sea turns white, but of course, you couldn't interpret that logically as being ice in pre-European Rarotongan, because there was no word for ice or frozen, and as far as we know in the East Polynesian languages. So, but they did use that word to mean whitecaps on the sea. So, if you accept it as whitecaps, then it's got nothing to do with ice or anything else. But the story was then imported into some Māori traditions in some parts of the South Island.
There's a narrative in historical narratives. You hear this in some traditional farewells where they talk about hui te rangiora and others being part of the Waka Wairua tradition. But as far as I understand, I don't hear anything about Antarctica.
No.
I just hear about hui te rangiora mā ka puta ki te waka. And it's a Waka Wairua journey. You mainly use them farewells, but not as far as Antarctica. Does it concern you, though, that even now we hear these claims being made of, supposedly old knowledge that is being rediscovered? When that happens, aside from frustration, and when Tipene talks about being the only weapon we have to defend the integrity of our Māori memory, it must be a hoha.
It is hoha. But in a way, it's always with us, and I don't just mean in Māoridom. There's, in Pākehā culture too. There's always people with strange ideas that they hold passionately and believe in passionately. They come and go, and that's just the nature of being human, I think.
Yeah. What are the questions you are still wanting to answer now?
I would have to think about that, because I'm still busy on a lot of fronts, and there are a lot of unrelated questions that are unrelated to each other. I would like to know a lot more about the sailing capability of Polynesian vessels, and of course from time to time there are vessels that pop up out of the sand dunes. The difficulty with them is that so far it's not entirely clear that they were made in New Zealand. And
You're not talking about the recent discovery on Chatham Islands, are
yes,
you? You are.
Yeah. If it's so, that it was reported in the Sunday Star Times by head of dock.
Yes.
Lou
Lou
Sanson.
Sanson, yeah.
Lou Sanson wrote, I think last week, that he'd been out to the Chathams and obviously been talking to somebody there. And they said that the cordage that they were excavating looked like coconut fibre, which is what I've been saying for a long time.
Yeah.
When you look at the pictures of it, it's definitely not flax fibre.
Yeah.
So if it is coconut fibre, then this is not a New Zealand-built vessel. And we know that a lot of material, much more than we think, comes out of the western tropical Pacific and ends up on the shores of New Zealand and the islands around New Zealand. We've known that for a long time. People have been recording, Melanesian outriggers, for example, on the coast north of Wellington. There's been material wreckage of canoes recorded on 90 Mile Beach. There's a number of canoe pieces, some of them clearly are Māori. I mean, the one that was the Tauihi or Taurapa, we're not absolutely sure, that was excavated on Rakiura was clearly Māori. And that some other pieces further south in bays south of there are Māori too. But amongst it, there is certainly material that's comes on the what's the East Australian current that runs essentially from Melanesia, runs down the eastern side of Australia, crosses the Tasman Sea and comes around the corner of it. Actually, it splits. Part of it goes north when it hits the coast. New Zealand part goes south, and the southern part runs back past the Chatham Islands. So that's an issue which I would really like to see resolved. Have we really found ancient Māori canoes, or are we finding either ancient or modern canoes from elsewhere in Oceania?
I hate to say it, but there's another 80 years of research there, Mātua. I hope you didn't have plans to retire anytime soon.
No, I'm not retiring.
Yeah, that's good. No, that's good. It fascinates me that you still have this passion and desire and intense want to keep answering questions that I know you're posing them to yourself, but actually we're posing to people like you as well. Because, as when Tepinet talks about the weapons we have for the defence of the integrity of our Māori memory, we're relying more and more, particularly now in the current political climate, we're relying more and more on people like you.
Yes, historians and archaeologists and...
No, I'm saying you.
Oh.
Well, yes, historians and archaeologists, but those that we trust, who have done the work and have those disciplines locked down, and we know that we can rely upon to be able to give the account that we need.
And that's why it's so important to come back to a point that you were making before, that we can see that the approach is analytical and scholarly. I mean, it has to be not claimed but shown in the way in which the work is done.
Okay, this could be controversial, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do we still maintain that same level of academic rigour and robustness now in our institutions that were there when you were training and being mentored and tutored, or has that started to slip, do you think?
It's hard to tell when you're out of it, but and I think every generation thinks it started to slip. Those of our that are younger colleagues are not quite so rigorous, but I suspect that nothing much has really changed in the doing of the archaeology, the history, and so on. What has changed is the environment of the universities, which taken over by managers. it was terrible at the ANU, and it was getting pretty bad by the time I had left Otago, and it's now, that managerial tide is really swamping so much.
So what then now is there? You talked about the paikorako at Ngai Tahu. Not every iwi has that exceptional institution tied with the iwi itself or with the runanga. Should it be the role, do you think, and obviously I'm not talking about Ngai Tahu, but other iwi, should it be the role of iwi now, Taupoti used to talk about the Article 3 line, is it now the responsibility, do you think, of iwi who have big commercial bases and potentially therefore have some room to move to be able to invest back into the memory of themselves? Should it be the iwi now who should be stepping up more in this space to be doing this kind of work, the likes of which you have been doing with Ngai Tahu across the board now, do you think?
I would like to think that was so. I'd like to think, yes, that all iwi would look to the conservation, preservation and understanding of their different kinds of historical and archaeological resources. Mm. Yes, and I think it's only the iwi that can do it fundamentally in the end. We have had and we do have historical bodies and archaeological bodies, but basically the material belongs to us as iwi, and we need to look after it.
I just look at the paikorako and the whakapapa unit in Ngai Tahu, amazing. Iwi come down to have a look at those units now, and they just are blown away by the amount of investment the iwi has made and how large that archive is now, particularly the whakapapa unit, and what it's been doing is amazing. I have kept you far too long. No, I would love to take another couple of hours, to be honest with you. There's lots of things that I want to discuss on a much more kind of personal academic research perspective, but we can save that for another time. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. It's
been a great experience, and thank you, Tama.
Yes, we should. So again, our producer Tama is Atholl's nephew, who set up the interview, and I think might have asked his uncle to hold off on other interviews to maintain some exclusivity for us in Māpuna. Our guest was, as you just heard there, Professor Atholl Anderson. Amazing. What a privilege to be here. That is us for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and listening to this interview. We will have more on Māpuna next week. Until then, e ke ana te kōrero ko te toka i Ākiha, he toka whitianga rā. Ko te toka i Māpuna ko te aiwe ki te ai, ko te ripokau. Ti heiwa mauri ora, kia tātou katoa.